We've all been there standing in a room where we don't quite fit, hoping nobody notices our worn shoes or weathered hands. That's exactly where Emilio Santos found himself at the most exclusive car launch in corporate history, until CEO Victor Lang and his colleagues decided to make an example of him in front of everyone. A woman in the crowd even laughed as Victor called him garage trash and thought that was the end of it. But when 13 luxury cars worth $11 million suddenly broke down during the live event, everyone ran except Emilio. What he did next changed everything Victor believed about power and respect. The quiet man in coveralls had a gift that would save the company and teach everyone watching what real leadership looks like. But here's what makes this story extraordinary. How did one man's quiet dignity in the face of public humiliation transform not just his own life, but the soul of an entire corporation? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Orion Motors headquarters as Emilio Santos adjusted his worn work boots outside the gleaming glass towers. In his weathered hands, he carried something precious, a leather tool roll that had belonged to his grandfather, Manuel Santos, a man who could diagnose an engine's troubles just by listening to its heartbeat. The ancient wrench set inside had turned bolts on everything from Model T Fords to modern street racers, each tool worn smooth by decades of honest work. Emilio had inherited more than just tools from his grandfather. He'd inherited an intuitive understanding of mechanical systems that bordered on mystical. As a teenager growing up in East Los Angeles, he'd spent countless hours under the hood of his grandfather's 1967 Chevelle, learning to hear the subtle whispers of metal and oil that spoke of deeper truths. "Mijo," his grandfather would say, "engines don't lie. They tell you everything you need to know if you listen with your heart, not just your ears." Those lessons had served Emilio well during his brief but legendary career as a street racer. By 18, he'd earned a reputation for building engines that sang with impossible power, modifications so elegant they seemed to defy the laws of physics. Underground racing circuits from Tijuana to San Francisco knew the name El Santos, the quiet kid who could make any car dance with mechanical poetry. But life has a way of redirecting even the most promising paths. When Emilio's mother, Rosa, was diagnosed with diabetes complications that required expensive treatment, and his younger sister Maria needed money for college, the family's financial crisis became too overwhelming to ignore. The scholarship opportunities that had once seemed within reach, mechanical engineering programs at Caltech and MIT, suddenly became impossible luxuries. Emilio made the choice that countless young men from his neighborhood had made before him. He set aside his dreams to keep his family afloat. The racing stopped. The engineering applications went unsubmitted. Instead, he took whatever work he could find: oil, changes, brake repairs, temporary assignments that paid the bills but never quite captured the full scope of his capabilities. Which was how he found himself, at 28, standing outside Orion Motors, wearing a temporary worker's badge and carrying his grandfather's tools. The company had called his employment agency, looking for someone to help with setup for their biggest launch event ever. The job description was simple: move cars, fetch supplies, stay invisible. Perfect work for someone who'd learned to keep his head down and his expectations modest. Inside the Orion Motors showroom, a different world entirely was taking shape. Victor Lang, the company's 45-year-old CEO, moved through the space like a man accustomed to bending reality to his will. Everything about him projected success: the Italian leather shoes that cost more than Emilio made in a month, the perfectly tailored suit that emphasized his athletic build, the confident way he gestured while barking orders to his staff. Victor had built Orion Motors from a struggling luxury car dealership into one of the most prestigious automotive brands in the world. His secret wasn't just business acumen, though he possessed that in abundance. It was his understanding that in the luxury market, image wasn't just important, it was everything. Every detail mattered. Every surface had to gleam. Every interaction had to reinforce the brand's message of exclusivity and perfection. The Hyperion launch isn't just about selling cars, Victor explained to his marketing director, Catherine Wells, as they surveyed the showroom. It's about selling dreams. These aren't just vehicles, they're statements. They're proof that excellence exists, that human achievement can be measured in horsepower and craftsmanship. Catherine nodded, checking items off her tablet. She'd worked with Victor for 6 years and understood his vision perfectly. The Hyperion line represented 3 years of development, partnerships with European manufacturers, and more than $50 million in research and development. 13 prototype vehicles, each worth between $700,000 and $1 million, each representing the pinnacle of automotive engineering. The live stream is confirmed, Catherine reported. We'll have cameras from Motor Trend, Top Gear, and CNN, plus the social media influencers you approved. Estimated initial viewership of 2 million, with potential viral reach in the tens of millions. Victor smiled. This was the moment he'd been building toward his entire career. The Hyperion launch would cement Orion Motors' position as the definitive luxury automotive brand, and his own reputation as a visionary leader who understood the intersection of technology and desire. What Victor didn't understand, what he couldn't have understood, given his background, was the quiet dignity that men like Emilio Santos carried in their calloused hands. Born into privilege, educated at Wharton, surrounded by executives who shared his worldview, Victor had never learned to recognize the difference between surface and substance. He saw coveralls and assumed incompetence. He heard accents and assumed ignorance. He encountered humility and mistook it for weakness. As Emilio entered the showroom through the service entrance, he paused to admire the vehicles arranged like jewels under the sophisticated lighting. Each car was a masterpiece of engineering, representing thousands of hours of design and development. His experienced eye immediately noted the subtle differences in their configurations, the hybrid powertrains, the advanced suspension systems, the integrated electronics that made modern supercars as much computer as machine. "Beautiful work," he murmured to himself, running his fingers along the edge of a silver Hyperion's carbon fiber body panel. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, each curve and angle calculated to maximize both aerodynamic efficiency and visual impact. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" The sharp voice belonged to Marcus Webb, Orion's head of security, a former police officer who took his responsibilities seriously. "Temps aren't supposed to touch the vehicles." Emilio stepped back immediately, raising his hands in a gesture of respect. "Sorry, sir, I was just admiring the engineering. I'll be more careful." Marcus studied him for a moment, taking in the clean but worn coveralls, the respectful manner, the tool rolls slung across his shoulder. "You're here for the setup crew?" "Yes, sir. Emilio Santos. The agency said you needed someone to help move cars and handle logistics." "Right. Well, just remember, look but don't touch. These aren't your average vehicles. Some of these prototypes are worth more than most people make in a lifetime." As Marcus walked away, Emilio noticed another member of the setup crew, watching the exchange with interest. Tommy Rodriguez, a full-time mechanic at Orion's service center, had been observing the new temp with curious eyes. "Don't mind Webb," Tommy said quietly. "He's just protective of the merchandise. You seem to know cars, though. That's not something you see every day with the temp workers." Emilio shrugged modestly. "I've been around engines most of my life. My grandfather taught me to appreciate good craftsmanship." "Yeah? What kind of work do you usually do?" "Whatever pays the bills. Repair shops mostly. Some restoration work when I can find it." Tommy nodded, understanding the reality of working-class automotive careers. "Well, today should be interesting. This is the biggest launch event in the company's history. Half the automotive world is going to be watching." As the morning progressed, Emilio threw himself into the work with quiet efficiency. He moved vehicles with the careful precision of someone who understood their value, arranged equipment with an eye for both function and aesthetics, and helped coordinate the complex logistics of preparing for an event that would host 300 of the most influential people in the automotive industry. Throughout it all, he remained aware of the growing tension in the showroom. This wasn't just a product launch, it was a statement about Orion Motors' future, about Victor Lang's vision, about the company's place in the competitive luxury market. The pressure was enormous, and everyone felt it. But Emilio also sensed something else, something that his years of mechanical intuition had taught him to recognize. Beneath the polished surface of the event, beneath the carefully orchestrated perfection, there was a subtle wrongness. The integrated systems that controlled everything from the vehicle's electronics to the showroom's lighting and sound seemed somehow out of harmony. It was like listening to an orchestra where one instrument was slightly out of tune, not enough to ruin the performance, but enough to make a trained ear uncomfortable. He kept his observations to himself, of course. Temporary workers weren't paid to offer technical opinions. But as the afternoon wore on and the final preparations began, Emilio couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to go terribly wrong. And in the executive offices above the showroom, Victor Lang was putting the finishing touches on the speech that would introduce the Hyperion line to the world, completely unaware that the quiet man in coveralls moving cars below possessed exactly the kind of mechanical genius that could save or destroy everything Victor had spent his career building. The red carpet stretched across the Orion Motors showroom like a river of crimson silk, its pristine surface reflecting the carefully positioned lights that would soon illuminate the most important moment in the company's history. Emilio had helped lay that carpet earlier in the day, working alongside the event coordinators to ensure every fold was perfect, every edge aligned with geometric precision. Now, as the evening's guests began to arrive, he found himself tasked with one final responsibility, moving the last of the Hyperion prototypes into their designated positions. The silver vehicle needed to be rotated 15 degrees to catch the light properly for the cameras, a seemingly simple task that required the kind of careful attention Emilio had learned to bring to every job. He approached the car with reverence, his grandfather's voice echoing in his memory. "Treat every machine with respect, Mijo. They respond to your intentions." The prototype was magnificent fusion of Italian design and German engineering that represented the pinnacle of automotive achievement. As he slid into the driver's seat, Emilio allowed himself a moment to appreciate the craftsmanship of the interior, the way every surface had been sculpted to serve both function and beauty. The engine started with a whisper, the hybrid powertrain engaging so smoothly it seemed almost supernatural. Emilio eased the car forward, his movements deliberate and controlled. He had moved hundreds of expensive vehicles in his various jobs, and he understood the weight of responsibility that came with handling someone else's dreams made manifest in metal and glass. But as he guided the Hyperion toward its final position, disaster struck with the cruel randomness that can transform an ordinary moment into a life-changing catastrophe. The edge of his worn work boot, the same boots that had carried him through countless honest days of labor court on the carpet's edge, pulling up a small section that had worked loose from its moorings. The sound was minimal, just a soft, scraping noise as rubber met fabric. But the result was immediate and devastating. A dark smudge appeared on the pristine red surface, a stain that stood out like a scar against the carpet's perfect complexion. Emilio stopped the car immediately, his heart sinking as he realized what had happened. "No, no, no," he whispered, stepping out to assess the damage. The stain was small, barely larger than a silver dollar, but in the context of the evening's importance, it might as well have been a crater. He knelt down, trying to smooth the disturbed fabric, hoping against hope that the mark might somehow disappear. "What the hell happened here?" The voice cut through the showroom's ambient noise like a blade, carrying the authority of someone accustomed to immediate answers. Victor Lang strode toward the carpet, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor with sharp, staccato beats. Emilio stood slowly, his hands respectfully at his sides. "I'm sorry, sir. My boot caught the edge of the carpet. I was being careful, but nothing." Victor's voice rose, drawing attention from the early arriving guests and the camera crews setting up their equipment. Do you have any idea what this event means? Do you understand what you've just done? The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Emilio felt the weight of every eye in the showroom turning toward him. He could see the guests beginning to whisper among themselves, their conversations punctuated by glances in his direction. The camera operators, sensing potential drama, began adjusting their equipment to capture the unfolding scene. "I understand, sir," Emilio replied quietly. "I take full responsibility. If you tell me how to fix it, I'll—" "Fix it?" Victor's laugh was sharp and humorless. "You think this is something you can just fix? This carpet was flown in from Italy. It was positioned by professionals. And now, 20 minutes before the most important event in our company's history, we have some—" He paused, his eyes taking in Emilio's coveralls, his work boots, his weathered hands. "Some garage trash, leaving his mark on our red carpet." The words hit Emilio like a physical blow, but he absorbed them with the quiet dignity that had carried him through countless challenges. He had faced discrimination before, had been judged by his appearance and his accent, had learned to maintain his composure in the face of disrespect. But something about this moment, the public nature of the humiliation, the presence of the cameras, the cruel precision of Victor's words, made the insult cut deeper than usual. "I understand you're upset," Emilio said, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "I'm truly sorry for the accident. Is there anything I can do to help fix the situation?" Victor stepped closer, his proximity clearly intended to intimidate. "What you can do is stay away from anything valuable. What you can do is remember your place." He gestured broadly at the showroom, at the gleaming vehicles, at the gathering crowd of influential guests. "This is what success looks like. This is what happens when people dedicate their lives to excellence instead of—" He glanced pointedly at Emilio's appearance. "Instead of making excuses." From somewhere in the growing crowd, a woman's laughter rang out sharp, mocking, and clearly directed at Emilio's expense. The sound seemed to embolden Victor, who smiled with cruel satisfaction. "You see," Victor continued, his voice now pitched for the audience, "even our guests understand the difference between those who belong here and those who don't. This is about standards. This is about understanding that excellence isn't just about the cars we build, it's about the kind of people we surround ourselves with." The live stream cameras, originally positioned to capture the arrival of distinguished guests, had found a more compelling narrative. The chat feed exploded with comments as viewers watched the confrontation unfold in real time. Some expressed sympathy for Emilio, but many others seemed to enjoy the spectacle of someone being publicly dressed down for their perceived failures. Catherine Wells, watching from the side of the showroom, felt a growing sense of unease. She had worked with Victor long enough to know that his temper could be a liability, especially in public situations. The optics of a wealthy CEO berating a working-class employee were potentially damaging, regardless of the circumstances that had prompted the confrontation. "Victor," she said quietly, approaching with diplomatic caution, "perhaps we should focus on the event preparations. We can address this issue after." "No," Victor interrupted, his attention still fixed on Emilio. "This is exactly the kind of moment that defines character. This is about accountability." He turned back to Emilio, his voice rising again. "I want you to understand something. This isn't just about a stain on a carpet. This is about respect. This is about understanding that actions have consequences." Emilio stood perfectly still, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes fixed on a point somewhere beyond Victor's shoulder. He had learned long ago that the best response to this kind of treatment was dignified, silency to absorb the anger without reflecting it back, to maintain his composure even when others lost theirs. "I understand, sir," he said simply. "Do you?" Victor's smile was cold. "Because I'm not sure you do. I'm not sure someone like you can understand what it means to build something of value, to create something that matters, to take responsibility for excellence." The irony of the moment was lost on Victor, but it wasn't lost on Tommy Rodriguez, who watched from the service area with growing anger. He had worked at Orion Motors for 8 years, had seen Victor's treatment of employees who didn't meet his standards of appearance or background. But this felt different, more personal, more cruel, more public. As the confrontation continued, Emilio found himself thinking about his grandfather, about the lessons that had shaped his understanding of dignity and respect. A man's worth isn't measured by his clothes or his accent. Manuel Santos had often said, it's measured by his actions, by his character, by the way he treats others when he has the power to hurt them. The stain on the red carpet remained, a dark reminder of the accident that had started this public humiliation. But as Emilio stood there, absorbing Victor's harsh words with quiet grace, he couldn't have known that this moment, this seemingly insignificant mishap, would soon become the catalyst for events that would transform not just his own life, but the very soul of Orion Motors. The cameras continued to roll, capturing every word, every gesture, every moment of the confrontation. And somewhere in the complex web of systems that controlled the showroom's environment, a subtle electronic imbalance was beginning to build toward a crisis that would test everyone's understanding of what it truly meant to be valuable. The humiliation was still fresh in the air when the first sign of trouble appeared. Emilio had retreated to the service area, ostensibly to continue his assigned duties, but really to collect himself away from the cameras and the whispered conversations of the arriving guests. He was wiping down tools that didn't need cleaning when he heard a sound that didn't belong in the carefully orchestrated symphony of the launch event. It was subtle at first, barely audible above the ambient noise of conversation and preparation. A faint electronic chirp, followed by another, then another. The kind of sound that most people would dismiss as background noise, but that Emilio's trained ear immediately recognized as significant. He looked up from his work, his attention drawn to the diagnostic tablet that Tommy Rodriguez had left on the service counter. The screen displayed a monitoring system that tracked the vital signs of all the vehicles in the showroom: engine, temperatures, battery levels, electronic system status. What Emilio saw made his blood run cold. One by one, warning indicators were beginning to appear across the display. Small yellow icons at first, scattered across the grid of 13 prototype vehicles. But as he watched, yellow began turning to red, and the pattern was spreading with alarming consistency. "Tommy," he called out, his voice carefully controlled. "You might want to look at this." Tommy jogged over from where he'd been adjusting the position of a tool cart, his expression shifting from curiosity to concern as he saw the diagnostic display. "What the hell?" He tapped the screen, cycling through different vehicle systems. "This doesn't make sense. These cars were all running perfectly an hour ago." The electronic chirping was getting more frequent now, and other people were beginning to notice. Catherine Wells, standing near the main entrance to greet arriving VIPs, touched her earpiece and frowned. "Sound team, we're getting some kind of interference. Can you identify the source?" Victor, who had been basking in the congratulations of early arriving board members, suddenly found his attention diverted by the growing symphony of electronic warnings. His smile faltered as he realized the sounds were coming from his precious Hyperion prototypes. "What's happening?" he demanded, striding toward the nearest vehicle. The sleek, black prototype that had been purring contentedly just minutes before now displayed a dashboard full of warning lights. "Why is this car showing errors?" Marcus Webb, the security chief, was already moving between the vehicles, his trained eye cataloging the rapidly developing crisis. "Sir, it's not just one car, it's all of them. Every single prototype is showing system failures." The transformation was happening with nightmarish speed. The carefully arranged display of automotive perfection was becoming a field of flashing lights and electronic alarms. The Hyperion prototypes, each one worth between $700,000 and $1 million, were failing simultaneously, their sophisticated systems crashing in a cascade of technological catastrophe. "Cut the cameras," Victor barked, but it was too late. The live stream was already broadcasting the chaos to viewers around the world. The chat feed exploded with comments as people watched the prestigious launch event devolve into a technical disaster. "I can't cut the cameras," Catherine replied, her voice tight with professional tension. "This is live television. We have network contracts." Dr. Sarah Kim, Orion's chief technical officer, appeared at Victor's side with a tablet displaying system diagnostics. Her usually composed demeanor was cracking under the pressure of watching 3 years of development work collapse in real time. "It's a cascade failure," she reported, her voice clinical despite the circumstances. "The onboard computers are crashing, taking the engine management systems with them. I've never seen anything like this." Victor's face was shifting through shades of red as he processed the magnitude of the disaster. "How is this possible? These systems were tested for months. They're completely independent of each other." "That's what we thought," Kim replied, her fingers flying over the tablet as she tried to identify the source of the problem. "But there's clearly some kind of interference pattern that's affecting all the vehicles simultaneously." The guests who had arrived early for the exclusive preview were now gathering in concerned clusters, their conversations shifting from admiration to worry. The automotive journalists were already pulling out their phones, sensing a story that was much bigger than a simple product launch. Tommy Rodriguez looked at the diagnostic display with growing alarm. "Boss, we need to call in the technical team. This is way beyond anything we can handle with basic tools." "I'm already on it," Victor replied, pulling out his phone. "I'm calling Peterson's emergency tech squad. They can be here in—" He paused, listening to the voice on the other end. "What do you mean, 3 hours? This is an emergency." The electronic alarms were now creating a cacophony that made normal conversation difficult. The sophisticated lighting system that had been designed to showcase the vehicle's beauty was instead illuminating their distress, red warning lights reflecting off polished surfaces in an almost hellish display. Emilio watched the unfolding crisis with a mixture of professional concern and personal sympathy. Despite the humiliation he had endured, he felt no satisfaction in seeing Victor's moment of triumph turn into a public disaster. His grandfather had taught him that a man's character was revealed not by his victories, but by how he handled defeat. But as he observed the technical chaos, his mechanical intuition was already working to identify patterns that the trained engineers were missing. The failures weren't random, they were following a specific sequence, spreading through the vehicle systems in a way that suggested a common cause rather than individual malfunctions. "The interference pattern," he murmured to himself, studying the diagnostic readouts. "It's not coming from the cars themselves." Tommy, overhearing, looked at him with surprise. "What did you say?" "The interference. It's external. Something in the environment is causing all the systems to fail simultaneously." Before Tommy could respond, the crisis escalated dramatically. The first prototype's alarm system activated, its piercing wail cutting through the other electronic noise like a knife. Within seconds, the second car's alarm joined the chorus, then the third, then the fourth. The showroom was now filled with a deafening symphony of car alarms, each one triggered by the same mysterious cascade failure. The guests were beginning to back away from the vehicles, their expressions shifting from concern to genuine fear. "Everyone out!" Victor shouted over the noise, his voice barely audible above the electronic chaos. "Security! Clear the showroom! Get everyone to the reception area!" But even as people began to move toward the exits, the situation continued to deteriorate. The overhead lighting system began to flicker, suggesting that whatever was causing the vehicle failures was affecting the building's infrastructure as well. Dr. Kim looked at her tablet with growing horror. "Victor, the building's main computer system is showing anomalies. This isn't just affecting the cars, it's affecting everything." Catherine Wells, coordinating the evacuation with professional efficiency, was already calculating the public relations nightmare that was unfolding. The live stream had captured every moment of the disaster, and social media was already exploding with speculation and commentary. As the last of the guests filed out of the showroom, leaving only essential personnel behind, Emilio found himself in a unique position. He was technically part of the evacuation order, but his temporary worker status made him invisible to the security team's immediate concerns. He stood in the service area, watching the diagnostic displays and listening to the mechanical symphony of failure with the concentrated attention of someone who had spent his life learning to understand the language of machines. And slowly, very slowly, he began to perceive the pattern that everyone else was missing. The failures weren't random. They weren't even entirely technical. They were environmental, triggered by something in the showroom's immediate surroundings, something that had been activated or changed just before the cascade began. Something that had to do with the synchronized systems that controlled not just the vehicles, but the entire launch event infrastructure. As the alarms continued to wail and the executives scrambled for solutions, Emilio Santos, the garage trash, who didn't belong among the champagne and luxury, was beginning to understand exactly what was going wrong, and more importantly, what it would take to fix it. The showroom had been evacuated, but the crisis continued to unfold with relentless momentum. In the executive conference room adjacent to the main floor, Victor Lang paced like a caged animal, while his technical team worked frantically to understand what had gone wrong with their perfect launch event. "Peterson's team won't be here for another 2.5 hours, Catherine reported, her usually composed demeanor showing cracks of stress. "The traffic from the city is completely blocked, and their equipment truck broke down on the freeway." Victor slammed his hand on the conference table, sending coffee cups jumping. 2.5 hours? Do you understand what's happening out there? We have live television coverage of our flagship products failing catastrophically. We have investors watching their money evaporate in real time. We have a problem that we can't solve by shouting at it, Dr. Kim interrupted, her voice sharp with professional frustration. "The diagnostic systems are showing failures across every electronic component in those vehicles. It's as if something is jamming their frequencies, but I can't identify the source." Meanwhile, down in the showroom, Emilio Santos was doing something that none of the executives upstairs would have thought possible. He was solving the problem. Not officially, of course. He was still just a temporary worker who had been told to stay clear of valuable equipment. But his grandfather's leather tool roll contained something more valuable than any of the sophisticated diagnostic equipment that the engineers were relying on. A simple paperclip that had been straightened and bent into a custom probe, a tool that Manuel Santos had created decades ago for accessing hard-to-reach electrical connections. Emilio had borrowed the diagnostic tablet that Tommy Rodriguez had left on the service counter, and he was now moving methodically through the showroom, using his improvised tool to test electrical connections and signal pathways. The alarms were still blaring, but his trained ear was filtering out the chaos to focus on the subtle variations in the electronic symphony. "It's not the cars," he said quietly to himself, confirming what his intuition had already suggested. "It's something else, something that's broadcasting interference." He approached the first prototype, a gleaming silver Hyperion that had been positioned at the center of the display. The vehicle's computer systems were completely crashed, its dashboard dark except for a few persistent error lights. But Emilio wasn't interested in the car's internal system. She was interested in the environment around it. Using the paperclip probe, he began testing the electrical connections of the showroom's infrastructure. The lighting system, the sound equipment, the networking cables that connected everything to the building's main computer system. Each test revealed the same pattern, subtle electromagnetic interference that was disrupting the normal operation of sensitive electronic equipment. "Where are you coming from?" he murmured, following the interference pattern like a detective following clues. The signal was strongest near the main display area, where the most expensive prototypes were positioned. But it wasn't coming from the cars themselves, it was coming from something else, something that had been activated during the launch event. Tommy Rodriguez, who had been watching Emilio work with growing curiosity, finally approached. "What are you doing? You're not supposed to be touching the equipment." "I'm not touching the cars," Emilio replied, not looking up from his work. "I'm testing the environment. There's electromagnetic interference coming from somewhere in this room, and it's causing all the system failures." "You figured that out with a paperclip?" My grandfather taught me that the simplest tools are often the most effective. Modern diagnostic equipment is sophisticated, but sometimes you need something basic to get to the truth. Tommy glanced around nervously, aware that they were both violating the evacuation order. Look, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but if security finds us in here, the interference is coming from the lighting system. Emilio interrupted, his voice carrying a note of excitement as the pattern became clear. Not the regular lights, the special effects lighting that was installed for the launch event. He moved toward the elaborate lighting rig that had been suspended above the main display area. The system was designed to create dramatic effects during Victor's presentation, synchronized with the sound system and the building's other electronic infrastructure. But Emilio could see that the synchronization was causing problems that the original designers hadn't anticipated. The frequency modulation is creating harmonics that interfere with the vehicle computer systems, he explained, using the diagnostic tablet to trace the signal pathways. It's like having a radio station broadcasting on the same frequency as your car's electronic systems. Tommy looked at the tablet display, which showed a complex pattern of electromagnetic signatures. Can you fix it? I think so. But I need to access the lighting control system, and I need to do it without shutting down the entire building. What Emilio didn't mention was that fixing the problem would require him to essentially rewire portions of the showroom's electrical infrastructure using nothing but basic tools and his understanding of electronic systems. It was the kind of improvised engineering that he had learned during his street racing days, when making an engine work meant finding creative solutions to impossible problems. Upstairs, the crisis was intensifying. Victor's phone was ringing constantly with calls from investors, journalists, and board members demanding explanations for the catastrophic launch failure. The live stream was still broadcasting the chaos, and social media was exploding with speculation about Orion Motors' future. "We need to shut down the stream," Victor demanded. "We need to control the narrative." "It's too late for that," Catherine replied, showing him her tablet. "The footage is already viral. Orion disaster is trending worldwide. The best thing we can do now is find a solution and demonstrate that we can handle a crisis." Dr. Kim looked up from her diagnostic equipment with an expression of frustrated helplessness. "I've run every test I can think of. The interference pattern is consistent, but I can't identify the source. It's like trying to find a needle in a haystack." "What about the building's maintenance staff?" Victor asked. "They must have blueprints, electrical diagrams." "They're all digital," Kim replied. "And the building's computer system is affected by the same interference that's hitting the cars. We can't access any of the technical documentation." Down in the showroom, Emilio was making progress. Using his paperclip probe and the diagnostic tablet, he had identified the specific frequency that was causing the interference. More importantly, he had figured out how to isolate it without disrupting the building's other systems. The solution required him to create a bypass in the lighting control system, essentially rewiring the connections to eliminate the harmonic interference. It was delicate work, requiring him to access electrical panels and connection points that were never meant to be modified by anyone other than professional technicians. But Emilio Santos had learned long ago that mechanical problems rarely cared about professional credentials. They responded to understanding, patience, and the willingness to work with your hands until the solution revealed itself. As he worked, splicing wires and rerouting connections with the precision of a surgeon, he could feel the electronic interference beginning to diminish. The diagnostic tablet showed the signal patterns stabilizing, the chaotic electromagnetic noise giving way to the clean signatures of properly functioning systems. "It's working," Tommy whispered, watching the tablet display with amazement. "The interference is dropping." One by one, the car alarms began to quiet. The dashboard lights that had been flashing error messages started to stabilize. The cascade failure that had threatened to destroy Victor Lang's perfect launch event was slowly, carefully, being reversed by a man with a paperclip and a deep understanding of how machines really worked. But even as the immediate crisis began to resolve, Emilio knew that the real challenge was just beginning. He had found the problem and created a temporary solution, but the interference would return unless someone addressed the root cause, the synchronization system that had been designed to create spectacular effects, but had instead created spectacular failure. And that would require not just technical skill, but the kind of systematic thinking that comes from understanding machines not as collections of parts, but as integrated systems that must work in harmony with their environment. As the last of the alarms fell silent, Emilio Santos stood in the quiet showroom, surrounded by $11 million worth of automotive perfection, and realized that he was about to become the most important person in the building. The silence in the showroom was almost eerie after the cacophony of alarms. Emilio stood beside the lighting control panel, his improvised paperclip probe still in his hand, watching the diagnostic tablet as the system readings gradually stabilized. The electromagnetic interference pattern that had been causing the cascade failures was diminishing, but he could see that his temporary fix was exactly that, temporary. "Jesus," Tommy whispered, staring at the tablet display. "How did you figure that out?" Emilio was studying the synchronized light show controller, a sophisticated piece of equipment that had been installed specifically for the launch event. The device was designed to coordinate the showroom's lighting effects with the sound system and even the vehicle's internal displays, creating a seamless multimedia experience that would showcase the Hyperion prototypes with maximum impact. "It's beautiful engineering," he said, tracing the controller's connections with professional admiration. But whoever designed the synchronization protocol didn't account for the harmonic interference it would create with the car's electronic systems. The controller was a marvel of modern technology, containing processors that could coordinate thousands of lighting elements, sound cues, and electronic signals with millisecond precision. But like many sophisticated systems, it had been designed by specialists who understood their individual components perfectly, while missing the broader implications of how those components would interact with the environment. "The frequency modulation creates standing waves," Emilio explained, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had spent years learning to diagnose complex problems. "When the light show synchronizes with the sound system, it generates electromagnetic patterns that interfere with the vehicle computers. It's like having a radio station broadcasting static directly into the car's electronic brains." Tommy looked at the controller with new respect. "So this whole disaster was caused by a light show?" "Not just any light show. This is a precision instrument designed to create effects that would be impossible with conventional lighting. The problem is that precision can be dangerous when it resonates with other systems." Emilio was already formulating a more permanent solution, but it would require him to essentially reprogram the controller's synchronization protocols. The work would be complex, requiring him to understand not just the electromagnetic principles involved, but the software architecture that governed the device's operation. As he worked, his mind drifted back to his street racing days, when he had learned to modify engine management systems to extract impossible performance from ordinary components. The skills were similar: understanding how different systems communicated with each other, identifying the critical pathways that controlled overall performance, finding ways to optimize interactions between components that had never been designed to work together. "I need to access the controller's programming interface," he said, studying the device's display panel. "The synchronization timing needs to be adjusted to avoid the resonant frequencies that interfere with the vehicle systems." "Can you do that?" "I think so, but it's going to take some time, and I need to be careful not to disrupt the building's other systems." What Emilio didn't mention was that the solution would require him to demonstrate the kind of technical expertise that was supposedly beyond the capabilities of a temporary worker. He would need to work with programming interfaces, diagnostic protocols, and system architectures that were typically the province of highly trained engineers. But his grandfather's lessons had taught him that understanding machines wasn't about credentials or formal education. It was about patience, observation, and the willingness to listen to what the systems themselves were trying to tell you. As he began to work on the controller, adjusting timing parameters and frequency modulation settings, he became aware that he was no longer alone in the showroom. Marcus Webb, the security chief, had returned to check on the situation and was now watching with growing confusion as a temporary worker performed highly technical repairs on sophisticated equipment. "What the hell are you doing?" Marcus demanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who was responsible for maintaining order in a chaotic situation. "I'm fixing the interference problem," Emilio replied, without looking up from his work. The lighting controller was causing electromagnetic interference that crashed the vehicle systems. "You're not authorized to work on that equipment. You're supposed to be evacuated with everyone else." Tommy stepped forward, his voice respectful but firm. "Marcus, he's the only one who's figured out what's wrong. The interference is already decreasing because of what he's done." Marcus looked at the diagnostic tablet, which showed the electromagnetic readings that Emilio had been tracking. The interference pattern was indeed diminishing, and the vehicle systems were beginning to show signs of recovery. "How do you know about this stuff?" Marcus asked, his suspicion mixing with grudging respect. "I've been working with engines and electronic systems most of my life," Emilio replied. "My grandfather taught me that every machine has its own language. You just have to learn to listen." As he spoke, Emilio was making fine adjustments to the controller's programming, each change carefully calculated to reduce the harmonic interference without disrupting the synchronized effects that the system was designed to create. It was delicate work, requiring him to understand not just the technical specifications, but the artistic vision that had driven the original design. The light show controller represented hundreds of hours of programming work, designed to create specific emotional responses in the audience through carefully timed lighting effects. Emilio's challenge was to preserve that artistic intent while eliminating the technical problems that were causing the system failures. "The timing sequences need to be staggered," he explained, adjusting parameters on the controller's interface. "Instead of synchronizing everything to the same frequency, we need to create offset patterns that avoid the resonant frequencies." His fingers moved across the controller's touchscreen with surprising familiarity, navigating through complex menus and programming interfaces that would have challenged most professional technicians. But Emilio's experience with engine management systems had taught him that most electronic devices shared common principles, regardless of their specific applications. "There," he said, stepping back from the controller. "The synchronization is now staggered to avoid the vehicle frequency bands. The light show should still work as designed, but without the electromagnetic interference." Marcus looked at the diagnostic tablet, which showed the interference readings dropping to acceptable levels. "How long will this fix last?" "It should be permanent, as long as nobody changes the programming parameters. But the real test will be whether the vehicle systems can recover from the cascade failure." Even as he spoke, Emilio could see signs of recovery in the showroom around him. The dashboard lights in the nearest prototype were stabilizing, error messages clearing as the vehicle's computers rebooted and began normal operation. The electromagnetic environment was returning to normal, allowing the sophisticated systems to function as they had been designed. But he also knew that his temporary fix was just the beginning. The cascade failure had affected not just the vehicle's primary systems, but their security protocols, their startup sequences, and their integration with the building's infrastructure. Each car would need to be individually diagnosed and restored, a process that would require someone who understood both the technical challenges and the psychological pressure of working under intense scrutiny. "We need to get Mr. Lang down here," Marcus said, reaching for his radio. "He needs to see this." "Wait," Emilio said quietly. "Let me make sure the fix is stable first. If the interference returns, we'll be back to the same problem." As he spoke, he was already moving toward the first prototype, the silver Hyperion that had been at the center of the display. The vehicle's dashboard was showing normal readings, but Emilio could see subtle signs that the system recovery was not complete. "The computers are rebooting," he observed, "but the startup sequences are corrupted. Each car is going to need individual attention to restore full functionality." Tommy looked at the 13 vehicles scattered around the showroom, each one representing hundreds of thousands of dollars in development costs and months of preparation for the launch event. How long will that take? For someone who understands the systems, maybe an hour per vehicle, but it has to be done right, or the problems will just resurface. As Emilio began his systematic approach to restoring the vehicles, he was unaware that his quiet competence was being observed by more than just Marcus and Tommy. The live stream cameras, which had been broadcasting the disaster to viewers around the world, were now capturing something much more interesting: the sight of a man in coveralls, methodically solving problems that had stymied teams of professional engineers. The chat feed was beginning to shift from mockery to curiosity, as viewers watched the same person who had been publicly humiliated earlier now demonstrate a level of technical expertise that was impossible to dismiss. Comments like, "Who is this guy?" and "He actually knows what he's doing," were beginning to appear with increasing frequency. But Emilio was focused entirely on the machines, listening to their electronic voices, understanding their needs, and applying the patient, methodical approach that his grandfather had taught him was the foundation of all good mechanical work. One by one, the Hyperion prototypes were coming back to life, their systems restored by a man who understood that respect for machines, like respect for people, was the finest lubricant for making everything work smoothly. The third prototype's restoration required a different approach than the previous two vehicles. The white Hyperion's energy management system had been corrupted in a way that created confusion between its multiple power sources. The sophisticated hybrid system couldn't distinguish between battery power, regenerative braking energy, and traditional gasoline engine output. "It's like the car has developed amnesia about its own capabilities," Emilio explained, studying the diagnostic readings with the focused attention of someone solving a complex puzzle. The system knows it has multiple power sources, but it can't remember how to coordinate them. In his weathered notebook, Emilio had documented years of observations about hybrid system interactions, handwritten notes that captured the subtle relationships between different types of automotive energy management. The pages were filled with diagrams showing how electric motors, gasoline engines, and regenerative systems could work together when properly coordinated. "Every hybrid system has its own personality," he said, flipping through pages of sketches that showed various powertrain configurations. "The challenge is understanding how all the different energy sources communicate with each other." The solution would require him to manually recalibrate each energy system individually, then teach the master control unit how to orchestrate their interactions. It was patient, methodical work that demonstrated the kind of deep, mechanical understanding that separated true expertise from technical knowledge. As he worked, Emilio became aware that the live stream audience was growing rapidly. The chat feed was now moving too fast to read, filled with comments from viewers around the world who were captivated by the sight of a man in coveralls performing what appeared to be mechanical surgery on million-dollar prototypes. "This is incredible," one comment read. "I've been an automotive engineer for 15 years, and I've never seen anyone diagnose hybrid system failures this quickly." Another viewer wrote, "The way he's working with those system sits like he designed them himself." The irony of that comment would have been apparent to Emilio if he had been paying attention to the social media response, but his focus remained entirely on the technical challenges before him. The third prototype's energy management system was responding to his careful attention, gradually learning to coordinate its multiple power sources with the efficiency that the original designers had envisioned. "There," he said, as the vehicle's hybrid system achieved perfect synchronization. "The energy management protocols are now properly integrated. The car should deliver both maximum performance and optimal fuel efficiency." The white Hyperion's engine note changed as the system optimization took effect, settling into a smooth, powerful idle that suggested all its complex systems were finally working in harmony. The diagnostic readings showed performance parameters that exceeded the original specifications, as if Emilio's restoration had unlocked capabilities that had been dormant in the original programming. "How did you know to adjust the regenerative braking coefficients?" Tommy asked. watching the diagnostic display with amazement. The braking system wasn't just malfunctioning, it was fighting the other energy recovery systems, Emilio replied. In a properly designed hybrid, all the energy systems should complement each other, not compete. The regenerative braking, the battery management, the engine efficiency protocols, they should work together like musicians in an orchestra. As he moved toward the fourth prototype, Emilio noticed that the atmosphere in the showroom was continuing to evolve. More people were entering the space, not just camera operators and technicians, but individuals who appeared to be executives, engineers, and what might have been legal representatives. "Something's happening," Marcus observed, watching the increased activity with professional interest. "This is starting to look like more than just documentation of a technical repair." The fourth prototype presented yet another unique challenge. Its sophisticated all-wheel drive system had been corrupted in a way that created dangerous instabilities in the vehicle's handling characteristics. The diagnostic readings showed that the system was attempting to send power to wheels that weren't receiving proper traction feedback, creating a condition that could make the vehicle unpredictable and potentially dangerous. "This is more serious than the others," Emilio said, studying the all-wheel drive diagnostic readings. "The traction control system is completely confused about the vehicle's dynamics. If someone tried to drive this car in its current state, it could be genuinely dangerous." The repair would require him to recalibrate not just the all-wheel drive system, but the integrated stability control, traction management, and dynamic handling systems that work together to keep the vehicle stable and predictable under all driving conditions. As he worked on the fourth prototype, Emilio found himself thinking about the street racing community that had taught him so much about vehicle dynamics. Those underground mechanics had understood that performance and safety weren't opposing forces. They were complementary aspects of good engineering that required careful balance and deep understanding. "The key to any high-performance vehicle is predictability," he explained, adjusting the traction control parameters with microscopic precision. "The car should respond to the driver's inputs in ways that are intuitive and consistent, regardless of the driving conditions." His handwritten notes contained detailed observations about vehicle dynamics, sketches showing how different suspension geometries affected handling characteristics, and calculations that demonstrated the mathematical relationships between traction, stability, and performance. "These notes," Tommy said, looking over Emilio's shoulder at the notebook. "This is like a textbook on advanced automotive engineering." "It's just observations," Emilio replied modestly. "Years of working with different vehicles, paying attention to how they behave under different conditions. Every car teaches you something new if you're willing to listen." The fourth prototype's all-wheel drive system gradually returned to normal operation, its complex algorithms learning to properly coordinate power distribution, traction control, and stability management. The diagnostic readings showed that the vehicle's handling characteristics were now not just restored, but optimized beyond their original specifications. "Perfect," Emilio said, as the fourth prototype systems achieved complete integration. "The all-wheel drive system is now properly coordinated with the stability control and traction management systems. This car should handle like a dream, regardless of road conditions." As he stood back from the restored vehicle, Emilio became aware that his methodical progress through the prototype repairs was being observed with increasing intensity by the growing crowd of observers. The livestream audience had grown to over 5 million viewers, and the social media response was generating attention from automotive industry leaders, engineering professionals, and media outlets around the world. But more immediately, he noticed that Victor Lang was no longer in the executive viewing area. The CEO had descended to the showroom floor and was now watching Emilio's work from a much closer distance, his expression unreadable, but his attention complete. "Mr. Santos," Victor said, approaching with a manner that was completely different from their earlier confrontation. "I've been watching your work, and I need to understand something. How did you acquire this level of expertise with our vehicle's systems?" The question hung in the air with implications that went far beyond simple curiosity. Emilio looked at Victor, then at the 4 restored prototypes, then at the growing crowd of observers who were waiting for his response. "I understand machines," he said simply. "My grandfather taught me to listen to what they're trying to tell you, to respect their needs, to work with them rather than against them. These are beautiful machines, and they deserve to be treated with the respect that all good engineering deserves." As he spoke, Emilio was already moving toward the 5th prototype, his commitment to completing the restoration unchanged by the growing attention and the obvious shift in how his work was being perceived by the people who had earlier dismissed him as garage trash. The 4th prototype was giving Emilio more trouble than he had anticipated. The cascade failure had corrupted its engine management system in ways that seemed almost deliberate, as if the vehicle's computer had developed a form of electronic amnesia that prevented it from recognizing its own components. "The fuel injection timing is completely wrong," he explained to Tommy, who was now serving as his informal assistant. "The system thinks it's dealing with a naturally aspirated engine, but this is a turbocharged hybrid. The parameters are so far off that it won't even start." As he worked to recalibrate the system, Emilio found himself accessing diagnostic modes that required increasingly sophisticated knowledge. The Hyperion's engine management system was protected by multiple layers of security, each one designed to prevent unauthorized modifications that could damage the expensive components. But something strange was happening. As he navigated through the diagnostic interfaces, the system began displaying information that made him pause. Engine configuration data, performance parameters, and design specifications that seemed somehow familiar, as if he had seen them before, in a different context. "That's impossible," he murmured, studying the diagnostic display with growing confusion. "What's wrong?" Tommy asked, noticing the change in Emilio's expression. "The engine configuration, the turbocharger mapping, the fuel injection timing, the hybrid integration protocols. I've seen this exact setup before." Emilio scrolled through the vehicle's technical specifications, his mechanical intuition telling him that these weren't just similar to systems he had worked with, they were identical to designs he had created years ago. The turbocharger boost curves, the fuel mixture algorithms, the seamless integration between gasoline and electric power systems, all of it matched work he had done during his brief time in formal automotive engineering. "This can't be right," he said, accessing deeper levels of the diagnostic system. "These are my designs. These are modifications I developed for street racing applications." Tommy looked at the diagnostic display, which showed complex engine parameters that were meaningless to him. "What do you mean, your designs?" Emilio was quiet for a long moment, his mind racing as he processed the implications of what he was seeing. "Before I left school, before my family needed money, I was working on a research project. Advanced hybrid powertrains that could deliver supercar performance with practical fuel economy. I submitted the designs to several automotive companies as part of a student competition." He opened his weathered notebook to a section near the back, where he had sketched detailed diagrams of engine configurations and hybrid system architectures. The pages were filled with calculations, performance projections, and innovative solutions to the technical challenges of combining different types of propulsion systems. "Look at this," he said, showing Tommy a page covered with turbocharger mapping diagrams. "This is the exact boost curve that's programmed into this car, down to the millisecond timing adjustments." Tommy compared the hand-drawn sketches to the diagnostic display, his eyes widening as he recognized the similarities. "You're saying Orion Motors is using your designs?" "I'm saying these cars are built around innovations that I developed 7 years ago. The hybrid integration, the turbocharger optimization, the fuel injection timing, all of it comes from research I did when I was 21 years old." The revelation hit Emilio like a physical blow. The Hyperion prototypes, the vehicles that represented Orion Motors' claim to engineering excellence, incorporated fundamental innovations that he had created during his brief time in formal automotive education. His designs had been refined and improved, certainly, but the core concepts were unmistakably his work. "I never received any compensation," he said quietly. "I never even heard back from the companies I submitted the designs to. I assumed they weren't interested." As he continued working on the fourth prototype, Emilio began to recognize more elements of his original research. The regenerative braking algorithms, the energy management protocols, the sophisticated control systems that governed the interaction between different power sources, all of them traced back to innovations he had developed during his time at the community college engineering program. The student competition was supposed to be about advancing automotive technology, he explained, his voice carrying a mixture of pride and bitter irony. "I believed that sharing my ideas would help create better cars for everyone. I never imagined that those ideas would be used to create million-dollar prototypes that I would only see as a temporary worker." The fourth prototype's engine suddenly roared to life, its hybrid powertrain engaging with the smooth precision that Emilio had envisioned years ago. The sound was deeply satisfying, not just because it represented another successful repair, but because it was the sound of his own innovations finally being implemented at the highest levels of automotive engineering. Tommy stared at the running engine, then at Emilio's notebook, then back at the diagnostic display. "This is huge. This is like, I don't even know what this is like." "You created the technology that's in these cars, and they never told you." "The automotive industry is built on ideas that come from everywhere," Emilio replied, his voice carefully controlled. "University research, independent inventors, collaborative projects, most innovations are improvements on existing concepts. The companies that bring those ideas to market are the ones that get the credit." But even as he spoke, Emilio felt a growing sense of injustice. Not about the money, though the financial compensation would have transformed his family's situation. Not even about the professional recognition, though seeing his name associated with these innovations would have opened doors that had remained closed for years. What bothered him most was the realization that his forced departure from formal engineering had been unnecessary. The very companies that had ignored his submissions, that had never responded to his inquiries about opportunities, had been secretly developing his innovations into commercial products. If any of them had offered him a position, or even acknowledged his contributions, his life might have followed a completely different path. "The irony is perfect," he said, moving on to the fifth prototype. "The CEO who just called me garage trash is about to launch a product line that's built on my research. The same research that could have kept me in school if anyone had been willing to pay for it." As word of the successful repairs spread through the building, the live stream audience was beginning to take notice of the quiet competence of the man in coveralls. The hashtag Emilio Santos was beginning to trend as viewers tried to identify the temporary worker who was single-handedly saving Orion Motors' launch event. But the online attention was about to explode into something much bigger. An automotive engineering professor at MIT, watching the live stream, recognized some of the diagnostic techniques that Emilio was using. Dr. Patricia Hernandez had been following hybrid powertrain development for years, and she remembered a student paper that had proposed remarkably similar innovations. "I need to check something," she said to her research assistant, pulling up archived files from a student competition that had taken place 7 years earlier. There was a submission from a community college student in California. The ideas were brilliant, but the student disappeared before anyone could follow up. As Dr. Hernandez located the archived files, she felt a growing sense of excitement. The student submission had been titled Integrated Hybrid Powertrains for High-Performance Applications, and it had been submitted by E. Santos from East Los Angeles Community College. "This is the same person," she said, comparing the diagnostic techniques being shown on the live stream to the technical innovations described in the student paper. "The man who's fixing those cars is the same person who developed the fundamental technology that makes them possible." Dr. Hernandez immediately began posting on social media, sharing excerpts from the original student submission and highlighting the connection to the live stream events. Within minutes, her posts were being shared by other academics, automotive engineers, and industry professionals who recognized the significance of what they were seeing. The narrative was shifting from a simple story about a launch event disaster to something much more complex and morally challenging. The same man who had been publicly humiliated for his appearance and background was now being revealed as the original creator of the technology that had made the entire event possible. Back in the showroom, Emilio was working on the sixth prototype, unaware that his story was rapidly becoming viral for reasons that had nothing to do with his mechanical skills. He was focused entirely on the task at hand, driven by the same professional pride that had motivated him to develop the original innovations years ago. "Respect is the finest lubricant," he said quietly, repeating his grandfather's words as he brought another $1 million prototype back to life. For machines and for people. But as the sixth engine purred to life, Emilio Santos was about to discover that the world's understanding of his worth was about to change in ways that would transform not just his own life, but the entire culture of the company that had dismissed him as garage trash. The transformation of public opinion was happening in real time, visible in the live stream comments that were now flooding the screen faster than anyone could read them. What had started as a small hashtag was becoming a social media phenomenon that was spreading across platforms and generating coverage from major news outlets. "Let-all drive is trending worldwide," Catherine Wells reported from the executive conference room, her voice tight with the implications of what she was witnessing. "We're getting calls from CNN, BBC, Reuters. Everyone wants to know about the temporary worker who's saving our launch event." Victor Lang stared at the multiple screens showing the live stream, social media feeds, and diagnostic data from the showroom. The contrast was impossible to ignore. The same man he had publicly humiliated was now being celebrated as a mechanical genius by millions of viewers around the world. "How did this happen?" Victor asked, his voice carrying a mixture of confusion and growing dread. "Dr. Hernandez from MIT posted about the student submission," Catherine replied, showing him the social media posts that were driving the narrative. "She's documenting the connection between the original research and the technology in our vehicles. The automotive engineering community is calling it one of the most significant cases of unrecognized innovation in decades." The posts were damaging in their precision, showing side-by-side comparisons between Emilio's original sketches and the actual specifications of the Hyperion prototypes. The evidence was overwhelming. The core innovations that Orion Motors had spent 3 years developing were based on research that a 21-year-old community college student had submitted to an industry competition. The legal implications alone could be catastrophic. Dr. Kim warned, studying the archived documents on her tablet. "If Santos can demonstrate that our technology is based on his original research, he could have grounds for a massive intellectual property lawsuit." But the legal concerns were secondary to the public relations nightmare that was unfolding. The live stream audience was watching a man who had been dismissed as garage trash systematically restore $13 million prototypes using knowledge that he had developed years before anyone at Orion Motors had even conceived of the Hyperion line. Down in the showroom, Emilio was working on the 7th prototype, a sleek red Hyperion with a particularly complex hybrid system that had suffered severe corruption. He was completely unaware of the global attention his work was attracting, focused entirely on the technical challenges of restoring the vehicle's electronic consciousness. "The energy management system is more sophisticated than the others," he explained to Tommy, who was now serving as both assistant and informal documenter of the restoration process. "It's using predictive algorithms to optimize the balance between electric and gasoline power based on driving conditions." The predictive algorithms were another innovation from Emilio's original research, a system that could analyze driving patterns and adjust the hybrid powertrain's behavior to maximize both performance and efficiency. Seeing his 7-year-old ideas implemented with such precision filled him with a complex mixture of pride and frustration. "I remember writing the code for these algorithms," he said, accessing the vehicle's programming interface. "I was trying to solve the problem of hybrid systems that worked well in laboratory conditions, but struggled in real-world driving situations. As he worked, Emilio began to notice that his restoration process was being observed by more than just Tommy and Marcus. Camera operators were positioning themselves to capture different angles of his work, and he could see additional personnel entering the showroom with equipment that looked more sophisticated than typical event documentation. "What's happening up there?" he asked, noticing increased activity in the executive viewing area. "I don't know," Tommy replied, but his expression suggested that he suspected something significant was developing. "But whatever it is, it's big. I've never seen this much attention on a single person during a corporate event." The seventh prototype's engine came to life with a sound that was music to Emilio's ears, the smooth, powerful note of a perfectly tuned hybrid powertrain operating at the peak of its capabilities. But even as he experienced the satisfaction of another successful repair, he was beginning to sense that the atmosphere around him was changing in ways that went beyond simple technical appreciation. Marcus Webb approached with a radio in his hand, his expression serious. "Mr. Santos, I need to let you know that there's significant media interest in your work. The live stream audience has grown to over 10 million viewers, and we're getting inquiries from major news organizations." Emilio looked up from his work, his hands still holding the diagnostic tools that had become extensions of his mechanical understanding. "Media interest? Your story is trending globally. People are talking about your technical skills, your background, the way you've handled this crisis. The hashtag #LetEl is being used by everyone from automotive engineers to social justice advocates." The revelation hit Emilio like a physical blow. He had been working in his usual quiet, methodical way, focused entirely on the technical challenges of restoring the damaged vehicles. The idea that his actions were being observed and evaluated by millions of people around the world was almost overwhelming. "I was just fixing the cars," he said quietly. "You were doing a lot more than that," Marcus replied. "You were demonstrating a level of technical expertise that's making people question everything they thought they knew about talent, education, and opportunity." As Emilio processed this information, he began to understand that his situation had evolved far beyond a simple technical crisis. The contrast between his earlier humiliation and his current demonstration of competence had created a narrative that resonated with people who had experienced similar dismissals based on their appearance, background, or circumstances. "The woman who laughed earlier," Tommy said, pointing toward the executive viewing area. "She's not laughing anymore. She's watching everything you do like you're performing surgery." Emilio followed Tommy's gaze and saw that the executive viewing area was now crowded with people who were observing his work with intense attention. The casual dismissal that had characterized their earlier interactions had been replaced by something that looked like genuine respect, mixed with what might have been embarrassment about their previous assumptions. "What do they want from me?" Emilio asked. "I think they want to understand how they got it so wrong," Marcus replied. "And more importantly, they want to figure out how to make it right." The eighth prototype presented a new challenge. Its hybrid system had suffered a complete failure of the master control unit that coordinated all the vehicle's electronic systems. The repair would require Emilio to essentially rebuild the car's electronic personality from scratch, using backup systems and manual programming techniques that pushed the boundaries of what was possible with the available tools. "This is the most complex repair yet," he said, studying the diagnostic readings. "The master control unit is completely corrupted, but the individual subsystems are still functional. I need to create a new control architecture that can coordinate everything without relying on the original programming." The task would require him to demonstrate not just technical knowledge, but creative problem-solving that went beyond conventional repair procedures. He would need to understand the vehicle's systems at a fundamental level, then develop new ways to make them work together in harmony. As he began the delicate process of rebuilding the vehicle's electronic consciousness, Emilio was aware that his every move was being watched by millions of people around the world. The live-streamed comments were now filled with technical questions from professional engineers, expressions of admiration from automotive enthusiasts, and social commentary from people who saw his story as representative of broader issues about recognition and opportunity. But more immediately, he was aware that the executives who had dismissed him earlier were now watching his work with the intensity of people who were beginning to understand that they had made a terrible mistake. The same hands that had been dismissed as those of garage trash were now performing mechanical surgery that was being acclaimed by experts around the world. "You know what the craziest part is?" Tommy said, watching Emilio work on the 8th prototype's control systems. "You're not just fixing these cars, you're making them better than they were before. The diagnostic systems are showing performance improvements over the original specifications." Emilio smiled for the first time since the crisis began. "My grandfather always said that every breakdown is an opportunity to build something better. Maybe that's what's happening here, not just with the cars, but with everything." As the 8th prototype's engine roared to life, running smoother and more efficiently than it had even during the original setup, Emilio Santos began to realize that he was about to face a choice that would determine not just his own future, but the future of everyone who had witnessed his transformation from dismissed temporary worker to internationally recognized automotive genius. The 9th prototype presented the most dangerous challenge yet. Its hybrid system had failed in a way that created a potential safety hazard. The high-voltage battery systems were unstable, and the vehicle's safety protocols were malfunctioning. The diagnostic readings showed warning indicators that made even Tommy step back with concern. "This one's different," Emilio said, studying the diagnostic display with the focused intensity of someone who understood that he was looking at a genuinely dangerous situation. "The battery management system is showing thermal runaway indicators. If I make a mistake here, the vehicle could catch fire." The master reset button for the 9th prototype was located in a position that would require Emilio to work directly over the unstable battery systems. The repair would demand not just technical skill, but the kind of physical courage that separated true mechanical expertise from textbook knowledge. "Maybe we should wait for the professional tech team," Marcus suggested, his security training making him uncomfortable with the safety implications of what Emilio was proposing. "The professional tech team won't be here for another hour," Emilio replied, his voice steady despite the danger. "And if the battery systems continue to destabilize, we could have a much bigger problem than a failed launch event." As he spoke, Emilio was already formulating a plan that would allow him to safely reset the vehicle's systems without triggering a catastrophic failure. The process would require him to work with millimeter precision, following a sequence of steps that had to be executed perfectly to avoid disaster. "I need to isolate the battery systems first," he explained, accessing the vehicle's emergency protocols. "Then I can reset the master control unit without risking thermal runaway." The live stream audience was watching with growing tension as Emilio prepared to tackle the most dangerous repair of the evening. The chat feed was filled with warnings from professional engineers who understood the risks involved, mixed with expressions of admiration for his willingness to attempt such a complex procedure. Victor Lang, watching from the executive viewing area, felt a growing sense of unease that had nothing to do with the technical challenges. The man he had publicly humiliated was now risking his personal safety to save the launch event, demonstrating a level of professional dedication that made Victor's earlier behavior seem petty and cruel. "He doesn't have to do this," Victor said quietly to Catherine Wells. "He could walk away right now, and no one would blame him." "But he won't," Catherine replied, her voice carrying a respect that had been completely absent during the earlier confrontation. "This is who he is. This is what we failed to see." Down in the showroom, Emilio was beginning the delicate process of isolating the battery systems. The work required him to access high-voltage connections while the systems were still active, using insulated tools and following safety protocols that he had learned during his years of working with modified electric vehicles. "The key is to work slowly and methodically," he explained to Tommy, who was serving as his safety observer. "High-voltage systems demand respect. One mistake, and you don't get a second chance." As he worked, Emilio found himself drawing on knowledge that went back to his earliest days of automotive experimentation. His grandfather had taught him that working with dangerous systems required not just technical skill, but a kind of mental discipline that allowed you to remain calm and focused, even when the stakes were highest. Fear is useful, he said, carefully disconnecting the first high-voltage connection. It keeps you alert, keeps you careful, but panic is deadly. The moment you let fear control your actions, you make mistakes. The isolation process took nearly 20 minutes, each step verified multiple times before proceeding to the next. Emilio worked with the precision of a surgeon, his movements controlled and deliberate despite the growing pressure from the watching audience. First battery bank isolated, he reported, checking the diagnostic readings. Thermal indicators are stabilizing, now for the tricky part. The master reset button was located in a recessed panel that required Emilio to reach across the partially isolated battery systems. The position was awkward, requiring him to work with one hand while maintaining his balance and avoiding contact with potentially dangerous components. "I need you to watch the thermal readings," he said to Tommy. "If you see any sudden temperature spikes, tell me immediately." As Emilio reached for the reset button, the showroom fell silent, except for the hum of the diagnostic equipment and the distant murmur of the live stream commentary. Millions of viewers around the world were watching as a man in coveralls risked his safety to save a corporate event that had begun with his public humiliation. His finger found the reset button, and he pressed it with the gentle, confident touch of someone who had learned to trust his mechanical instincts. For a moment, nothing happened. The diagnostic displays showed no change, and the vehicle systems remained locked in their corrupted state. Then, slowly, the vehicle's electronics began to respond. The diagnostic readings shifted from red to yellow to green as the master control unit reinitializer and began the process of restoring normal operation. The battery thermal indicators stabilized, and the safety protocols re-engaged with the smooth efficiency of properly functioning systems. "It's working," Tommy whispered, his voice filled with relief and admiration. The 9th prototype's engine came to life with a sound that was somehow different from the other cleaner, more refined, as if the dangerous repair had awakened something in the vehicle's electronic consciousness that had been sleeping before. "Beautiful," Emilio said, his voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who had successfully navigated a genuinely dangerous situation. "The master control unit is learning the new parameters. It should be fully operational within a few minutes." As he stepped back from the restored vehicle, Emilio became aware that the atmosphere in the showroom had changed dramatically. The camera operators were positioning themselves to capture his reaction, and the executive viewing area was buzzing with activity that suggested major decisions were being made. But more importantly, he could see that Victor Lang was descending from the executive area, his expression serious and his pace deliberate. The CEO, who had dismissed him as garage trash, was now approaching with the manner of someone who had something important to say. "Mr. Santos," Victor said, his voice carrying none of the arrogance that had characterized their earlier interaction. "I need to speak with you." The final 4 prototypes stood like soldiers awaiting their turn, each one representing not just automotive engineering excellence, but the culmination of a night that had transformed from corporate disaster into something approaching redemption. Emilio had worked methodically through 9 vehicles, each repair building his reputation among the global audience, while simultaneously revealing the depth of Victor Lang's earlier misjudgment. "Before we continue," Victor said, his voice carrying an uncharacteristic note of humility, "I need to acknowledge something. I've been watching your work, and I've been learning about your background. Dr. Hernandez from MIT has been in contact with our technical team, and she's shown us documentation that proves these vehicles incorporate your original research." The admission hung in the air like a challenge to everything that had happened earlier in the evening. The live stream audience, now numbering over 15 million viewers worldwide, was witnessing something unprecedented. CEO publicly acknowledging that he had been wrong about someone he had dismissed based on appearance and assumptions. I created those designs to help advance automotive technology, Emilio replied, his voice steady despite the emotional weight of the moment. I submitted them to industry competitions because I believed that innovation should be shared, not hoarded. Victor nodded, his expression serious. And instead of recognizing your contributions, instead of offering you opportunities, the industry and I personally failed you. The technology that makes these vehicles possible came from your mind, your research, your dedication to mechanical excellence. The cameras captured every word of the exchange, and the social media response was immediate and overwhelming. The hashtag, #LetL was joined by Recognize Genius and Respect the Wrench, as viewers around the world expressed their support for Emilio and their disappointment in the systems that had overlooked his talents. But even as the public apology unfolded, Emilio's attention was drawn to the remaining prototypes. The 10th vehicle was showing signs of the same battery instability that had made the 9th so dangerous, and the 11th appeared to have suffered a complete failure of its hybrid integration systems. We still have work to do, he said, gesturing toward the remaining cars. The launch event isn't over, and these vehicles need to be restored to full functionality. Victor looked at the diagnostic displays, then at Emilio, then at the millions of viewers who were watching the exchange. Will you continue? After everything that's happened, will you help us complete this? The question carried weight that went beyond the technical requirements of the remaining repairs. It was a request for forgiveness, for collaboration, for the kind of professional partnership that should have been offered years ago when Emilio first submitted his innovative designs to the industry. These are beautiful machines, Emilio said, approaching the 10th prototype. They deserve to be restored properly, regardless of the circumstances that brought us here. As he began working on the 10th vehicle, Emilio found himself thinking about his grandfather's teachings about dignity and respect. The old man had always insisted that a person's worth wasn't determined by how others treated them, but by how they responded to both praise and criticism. Respect is the finest lubricant, he said quietly, repeating the phrase that had become his personal philosophy. For machines and for people. The 10th prototype's repairs went smoothly, the battery systems responding to Emilio's careful attention with the reliability of properly maintained equipment. But as he worked, he became aware that the atmosphere in the showroom was continuing to evolve in ways that suggested major changes were coming. Catherine Wells was coordinating with media representatives, board members, and what appeared to be legal counsel. The live stream audience was being joined by automotive industry leaders, government officials, and academic researchers who were recognizing the broader implications of what they were witnessing. This isn't just about fixing cars, Tommy observed, watching the activity around them. This is about changing how the industry recognizes and rewards innovation. The 11th prototype presented a unique challenge. Its hybrid systems had been corrupted in a way that created a feedback loop between the electric motors and the gasoline engine. The repair would require Emilio to essentially reprogram the vehicle's fundamental understanding of how different types of power should work together. This is the most complex integration problem yet, he explained, studying the diagnostic readings. The system is trying to use electric power and gasoline power simultaneously, which creates inefficiencies that could damage the engine. As he worked to resolve the feedback loop, Emilio found himself drawing on the deepest levels of his mechanical understanding. The solution required him to think not just about individual components, but about the philosophical principles that governed how different types of energy should interact in a hybrid system. Every machine has its own logic, he said, adjusting the integration parameters with microscopic precision. The challenge is to understand that logic well enough to help the machine realize its full potential. The 11th prototype's engine came to life with a sound that was somehow different from all the other perfect harmony between electric and gasoline power that represented the idealized vision of hybrid technology. The diagnostic readings showed performance parameters that exceeded the original specifications, as if the repair had unlocked capabilities that the original programming hadn't fully utilized. Incredible, Dr. Kim said, watching the diagnostic feeds from the executive area. The performance metrics are showing improvements across every category. He's not just fixing these cars, he's optimizing them beyond their original design parameters. The 12th prototype was the most visually striking of the collection, a gleaming black Hyperion with aggressive aerodynamic features that made it look like something from a science fiction movie. But its beauty was marred by a complete failure of the advanced driver assistance systems that were supposed to represent the cutting edge of automotive safety technology. The ADAS systems are completely corrupted, Emilio observed, studying the diagnostic readings. The vehicle doesn't know where it is, what's around it, or how to respond to its environment. The repair would require him to essentially teach the vehicle how to see and think about its surroundings, using sensor calibration techniques that push the boundaries of what was possible with the available equipment. As he worked on the 12th prototype, Emilio became aware that a champagne glass was being placed on a table near his workspace, not for him, but as part of the preparations for what appeared to be an impromptu celebration. The gesture was small, but it represented a dramatic shift in how his presence was being perceived. "The board has been in emergency session," Victor said, approaching as Emilio completed the ADAS calibration. "They've authorized me to make you an offer that reflects both your technical contributions and your professional dignity." The 12th prototype systems came online with a sophisticated awareness of its environment that was almost unsettling. The vehicle's sensors were perfectly calibrated, its safety systems were functioning at optimal levels, and its integration with the showroom's infrastructure was seamless. "One more to go," Emilio said, looking at the 13th and final prototype. "Then we can talk about the future." The final vehicle was the most advanced of the collection, a prototype that incorporated not just hybrid technology, but experimental systems that pushed the boundaries of what was possible in automotive engineering. Its failure had been the most complete, requiring a restoration that would test every aspect of Emilio's mechanical understanding. But as he approached the 13th prototype, Emilio Santos was aware that he was about to complete more than just a series of repairs. He was about to demonstrate that true innovation came not from corporate resources or academic credentials, but from the kind of deep understanding that could only be developed through years of respectful attention to the language of machines. The champagne glass caught the light as he began his final repair, a symbol of celebration that now seemed appropriate for reasons that had nothing to do with corporate success and everything to do with the recognition of human dignity and professional excellence. The 13th prototype purred to life with a sound that seemed to encapsulate everything that had happened during the remarkable evening. It was the voice of precision engineering, of problems solved through patient understanding, of respect finally given where it had always been deserved. As the final engine settled into its smooth idle, Emilio Santos stood in the center of the Orion Motors showroom, surrounded by $13 million worth of automotive perfection that he had single-handedly restored to working order. The applause began spontaneously, starting with Tommy Rodriguez and spreading through the camera crews, the security staff, and finally reaching the executives in the viewing area. It was not the polite, obligatory applause of a corporate event, but the genuine appreciation of people who had witnessed something extraordinary. "Ladies and gentlemen," Victor Lang's voice carried across the showroom, amplified by the sound system that had been part of the evening's original disaster. "I want to acknowledge the exceptional work of Emilio Santos, who has not only saved our launch event, but has demonstrated the kind of technical excellence that represents the true spirit of innovation." The live stream audience, now numbering over 20 million viewers worldwide, was witnessing a moment of corporate redemption that felt both unprecedented and deeply satisfying. The contrast between the evening's beginning and its conclusion was so dramatic that it seemed almost scripted, yet the authenticity of the emotions involved was undeniable. "Mr. Santos," Victor continued, approaching with a document that had been prepared during the final repairs. "On behalf of the Orion Motors Board of Directors, I want to offer you a position that reflects both your technical contributions and your professional dignity. We're proposing that you lead our new humanitarian division department dedicated to developing affordable, sustainable automotive technology for underserved communities around the world. The offer was generous, both in terms of compensation and responsibility. The humanitarian division would have a substantial budget, significant autonomy, and the mandate to pursue exactly the kind of innovation that had motivated Emilio's original research years ago. But as he looked at the roadmap that Victor had spread on the table beside the champagne glass, Emilio found himself thinking about the journey that had brought him to this moment. The humiliation, the recognition, the gradual understanding that his worth had never been determined by others' opinions, all of it had led to this choice. "I appreciate the offer," he said, his voice carrying the same quiet dignity that had characterized his behavior throughout the evening. "But I have a condition." Victor's expression showed both curiosity and concern. "What kind of condition?" "I want you to join me on a cross-country road tour." Emilio replied, his words causing a murmur of surprise among the watching crowd. "Not as CEO to employee, but as partners learning together. I want to visit the communities where this technology will be used, talk to the mechanics who will maintain it, understand the real-world conditions that will determine whether our innovations actually help people." The proposal was unexpected, almost audacious in its implications. It would require Victor to step away from the corporate environment that had shaped his understanding of the automotive industry, to experience the world of working mechanics and practical problem-solving that had formed Emilio's perspective. "A road tour?" Victor asked, his voice carrying a mixture of confusion and growing interest. "My grandfather always said that you can't really understand a machine until you've driven it on different roads, in different conditions, with different loads," Emilio explained. "The same is true for understanding people and communities. If we're going to develop technology that actually serves people, we need to understand how they live and work." The roadmap spread on the table showed a route that would take them through small towns and urban communities, repair shops and technical schools, places where automotive technology intersected with real human needs. It was a journey that would require both men to step outside their comfortable assumptions and learn from people whose perspectives had been shaped by different experiences. "How long would this tour take?" Victor asked, studying the proposed route. 6 months, maybe 8. Long enough to understand the human stories behind every wrench and wheel, every repair and modification. Long enough to build technology that actually serves the people who will use it. The proposal represented more than just a business arrangement. It was an invitation to the kind of genuine partnership that might have existed years ago if the industry had been more willing to recognize talent regardless of its source. Victor looked at the roadmap, then at the 13 restored prototypes, then at the millions of viewers who were watching the exchange with fascination. The decision he made would determine not just his own future, but the direction of Orion Motors and the broader automotive industry's approach to innovation and recognition. "I accept," he said, his voice carrying a conviction that surprised even himself. "But I want to add something to the partnership. I want to establish a formal innovation recognition program, something that ensures that contributors like you are identified and supported from the beginning, not discovered by accident during crisis situations." The Innovation Recognition Program would create pathways for talented individuals to contribute to automotive development, regardless of their educational background or professional credentials. It would be funded by Orion Motors, but administered independently, ensuring that the kind of oversight that had allowed Emilio's contributions to be overlooked could never happen again. "That sounds like the beginning of real change," Emilio said, extending his hand to Victor. "Partners?" "Partners," Victor replied, shaking hands with the man he had dismissed as garage trash just hours earlier. The live stream audience erupted in digital celebration, with comments flowing too fast to read and hashtags multiplying across every social media platform. The story of CEO Bullied Poor Mechanic. At company event then, he fixed 13 luxury cars. Worth 11M had become something much larger, a narrative about recognition, redemption, and the possibility of building systems that valued substance over appearance. As the evening wound down, Emilio found himself back in the service area, carefully cleaning and organizing his grandfather's tools. The leather tool roll that had carried him through countless repairs was now being packed away after its most significant challenge yet. "Those tools have quite a story," Tommy observed, watching Emilio work with the same methodical care he had shown throughout the evening. "Every tool has its story," Emilio replied, running his fingers over the worn handles that had shaped his understanding of mechanical work. "But the real story is about the hands that use them and the respect those hands show for the work." The road map lay open on the table, showing the route that would take him and Victor through communities where automotive technology intersected with human needs. It was a journey that would require both men to learn from people whose perspectives had been shaped by different experiences, to understand the real-world conditions that would determine whether their innovations actually helped people. "You know what the craziest part is?" Tommy said, looking around the showroom where 13 perfectly restored prototypes sat gleaming under the lights. "This whole thing started with a stain on a carpet, one small accident that seemed like a disaster, and it ended up changing everything." Emilio smiled, remembering his grandfather's words about breakdowns being opportunities to build something better. Maybe that's the real lesson. Sometimes the things that seem like failures are actually the beginning of something much more important. The worn work boots that had caused the original accident now carried him toward a future that would have been impossible to imagine just hours earlier. The stain on the red carpet had been cleaned away, but the changes it had set in motion would continue to ripple through the automotive industry for years to come. As Emilio Santos walked toward his new future, he carried with him the knowledge that respect for machines, for people, for the dignity of honest work truly was the finest lubricant for making all systems run smoothly. The journey ahead would be challenging, but it would be undertaken with the kind of partnership and mutual respect that made any mechanical problem solvable. The roadmap showed the way forward, and two men who had learned to see past their assumptions were ready to travel it together, building technology that would serve not just corporate interests, but the human communities that gave all innovation its ultimate meaning and purpose.